I had a specific question, which I actually wanted to ask you at some point when we were hanging out and didn't get the chance. The song Carolina in My Mind, he did two versions. Did you produce both those versions? Yes?
Yes.
The original one was late 60s and much faster and much different. I only knew the later version, which is from the greatest hits. What prompted that? Was that his decision, your decision? Because the one that everybody knows, I think, is the later version, and that's the one that I was attached to as a kid. And
I can explain.
Yeah, please. I'm so curious about that.
There's a couple of different explanations, but the primary one is legal. Is the fact that we were, well, where should I start? We were putting together the greatest hits album. And we realized this was when James Taylor was on Warner Brothers Records. Sweet Baby James had been a hit. Mudslide Slim had been a hit. We'd sold millions of records. Time for a greatest hits, cashing in by the record company. And I was very anxious that a couple of songs from the first album, Something in the Way She Moves and Carolina, should be on it. And at the time, Apple Records was completely tied up in legal shenanigans. Alan Klein had come in, taken over Apple. I resigned.
This is Apple, the Beatles record company.
Apple, the Beatles record company. Yeah,
that's who we made. You were the first president of, or you were somehow.
I was the head of A&R.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start there. Actually,
sure. Yeah.
I got the job as head of A&R for Apple Records when the Beatles had the idea of starting a record label. The first artist signed to Apple Records, which was James. I met him in London through my friend Danny Korchmar, fell in love with his music, signed him, and we made a record. At the time, I made quite a decorated record. It's fairly orchestrated. There's string quartet here, some brass, some percussion, all this stuff. Working with a friend of mine who was a classical composer called Richard Hewson. We put all this stuff on the record. It was mainly, I think, and because looking back on it, it is a bit kind of overproduced or over-decorated or something, but I really wanted to make people pay attention to him. It was like me saying, this isn't just another long-haired, folky, with a acoustic guitar. This guy's a really important musician and an important songwriter. So I think that's why I didn't want it to be just him and his acoustic noodling through 10 songs. And so Carolina does have some strings on it. It is quite fast, maybe too fast, and so on. But that wasn't the reason we redid it. It was because when we put the Greatest Hits album out, we could not, as I've explained, license those two tracks from Apple. There wasn't even anyone you could talk to. It was in legal chaos. Alan Klein had taken over. Paul resisted that. Paul was right. Alan Klein was a crook. Giant legal fights and all that stuff. So it was not possible. So it was equally clear that they were not in any position to bother us about us re-recording the songs, which officially Apple, under most record contracts, would have. So we just went, screw it, we'll just cut them again. And that presented an opportunity to do them in a much less complicated way. More like James was, by this time, doing them on stage live. So that's why we redid Something in the Way She Moves, which was one of the most successful songs off the Apple album, and Carolina. Carolina was a song that was written halfway through the making of the Apple album. We didn't have it when we started. James actually took some time off from recording and went away with a girlfriend to Formentera, an island in the whatever ocean that is, and Mediterranean, I guess. And then from Formentera went across to Ibiza. They were supposed to get the last ferry back from Ibiza, missed it, sat on the beach together and had no money for a hotel or anything. And James wrote the song feeling homesick. So he wrote Carolina in My Mind, came back to London to finish the record and said to me, oh, I wrote this song while I was away. And I went, that's brilliant. That's great. We have to put it on the record right now. And we did. And I put the string quartet on it. Maybe I shouldn't have. But anyway, all these problems were resolved by the fact that, we got to recut it in a less arranged way for the Greatest Hits album. And yes, that's the one most people remember. Though it's interesting that the Apple album versions of all those things does have quite a following as well, but more of a nerdier nature because the album wasn't a hit.
It's interesting that even talking about it now, you go, maybe I shouldn't have done that on a production from 1969.
Yeah. I know, exactly. Yeah.
Well, so
we change it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like that's a really interesting point, and I'm curious if you have other examples of it. I feel like all the best creatives that I know, whether they're songwriters, producers, mixers, maybe even painters, authors, comedians, whatever, that when you actually put your work, when the work gets solidified and finished and then it's no longer yours, you put it off in the public, there's always things that you wish you could change, or at least some significant amount of the time.
Absolutely. That relates to my point that one of the functions of the producer is knowing when to stop, and with movies now, it's getting really dangerous. I guess it could with music too, that you can basically tweak it at any time. The movie you can change a scene between one night at the movie theater and the next, in theory, because you can just upload them a new version, and the same is theoretically true, I suppose. You could actually say, as from tomorrow, the guitar solo will be 2 dB louder on Spotify.
Oh, it's been done. I mean, Kanye's been doing it. I mean, it was famously on The Life of Pablo three albums ago, I think. He put up a version and then put up a new version with a new feature and split one song into 2 tracks. Maybe that's a new art form. Actually, he just did that with his most recent album. He did these listening parties over the course of a month.
Yes.
And apparently
and they were different.
They were different, and those I know that worked on it said that he was really listening to the internet and the people around him and the reaction of the crowd and making adjustments accordingly. And I don't know if that's quite art by committee, but it's certainly art by some sort of dialogue.
It's art by consensus of some kind. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting.